The directive from the Magellan conglomerate was as clear as it was arrogant, secure Xylos. They called it a legacy world, a forgotten jewel left behind by some long-vanished precursor race, and our vessel, the resource harvester Stargazer, was the key to unlocking its value. In the sterile, recycled air of the briefing room, Director Kalen Vance projected an image of the planet onto the main screen, a swirl of emerald green and sapphire blue, pristine and untouched. His voice, smooth and practiced, filled the space with the promise of profit. He spoke of the inert progenitor, a dormant terraforming agent that was rumored to be the secret of the precursor's galaxy-spanning reach. It was, he assured the assembled department heads, a biological miracle, a substance capable of rewriting planetary ecosystems, and it was now the exclusive property of the conglomerate. He gestured to the verdant world on the screen, his smile sharp and predatory. Centuries of myth, decades of searching, have led us here, Vance declared, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Our scans confirm it. The progenitor is present in dormant, planetary-scale quantities, integrated into the local flora. It's the single most valuable resource ever discovered. This mission will make Magellan the undisputed power in the settled systems. I stood at the back of the room, my own datapad, displaying a far more troubling picture. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and as the expedition's chief xenobotanist, the planet's flora was my domain. While Vance sold his dream of corporate godhood, I was watching the planet breathe. My long-range biosensors were picking up a rhythmic, impossibly complex energy pattern emanating not from a single source, but from the entire planetary biosphere. It was a slow, deep pulse of bioelectric energy flowing through the planet-wide fungal network that served as the foundation for all life on Xylos. The pattern was erratic yet structured, chaotic yet self-correcting, mimicking the neural activity of a colossal sleeping brain. More disturbing were the genetic markers I'd managed to sequence from atmospheric pollen samples. Buried deep within the non-coding DNA of the native plant life was a repeating sequence, a fractal pattern of proteins that wasn't a biological function. It was a message, a warning, written in the language of life itself, and it told a simple, terrifying story of consumption, of a hunger that slept but never died. When the briefing concluded, I pushed my way through the self-congratulatory crowd to Vance's side. Director, I began, holding up my datapad. You need to see this. The entire biosphere is interconnected by a single mycelial network. The energy readings are not consistent with a dormant agent. It's active on a low level. And I've found a warning encoded in the genetic structure of the local organisms. Vance gave my datapad a cursory, dismissive glance. Dr. Thorne, your diligence is noted, he said, his smile never faltering. But you're a botanist. You see life and complexity where there is only raw, inert material. The progenitor agent has been dormant for 1,000,000 years. The energy fluctuations are residual, echoes of a bygone era. As for your genetic warning, it's likely nothing more than a biological quirk, a vestigial trait from whatever organism the precursors used as a template. Our mandate is to harvest, not to be spooked by shadows in the data. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a dismissal. Prepare your survey team. We're going down. The first landing was led by Commander Eva Rostova, head of our private security detachment. She was a woman carved from granite, a pragmatist who trusted her hardware and the training of her soldiers above all else. I watched from the Stargazer's biolab as her team's dropship, the Prospector, descended into the Emerald Canopy. The on-world cameras painted a picture of an alien paradise. Towering, fungal-like trees formed a ceiling of phosphorescent caps that cast the forest floor in a soft, ethereal glow. The air was thick with shimmering spores that drifted like lazy snowflakes, and the ground was a carpet of plush, springy moss that muffled every footstep. It was beautiful, but it was a silent beauty. No birds, no insects, no animal calls, just the whisper of the recycled air in our comms and the unnaturally quiet tread of the soldiers' boots. Rustova's voice came over the channel, crisp and professional. Landing zone secure. Air quality is breathable, if a bit saturated. No signs of hostile life forms. It's quiet down here. Director, as expected. Commander. Vance's voice replied, dripping with satisfaction. Proceed to the primary survey site. As they moved deeper into the forest, I kept my eyes glued to the biometrics of Rostova's team. Every soldier was wired, their vital signs streaming back to my lab in real time. An hour into the expedition, I noted the first anomaly across the entire team. Simultaneously, serotonin and dopamine levels began to rise, a subtle chemically induced euphoria. I flagged it for Rostova. Commander Thorne here, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I'm reading elevated neurotransmitter activity in all your personnel. Are you experiencing any psychoactive effects from the airborne spores? There was a pause. Negative. Thorne, she replied, though I could hear a strange lightness in her tone. Morale is high. Is all. It's a spectacular view. You should see it. A few minutes later, the first real crack appeared. A young private named Jax, on point for the squad, stopped dead in his tracks. His helmet cam showed him staring up at one of the giant fungal trees, its glowing cap pulsing with a soft of blue light. A low chuckle echoed over the comms, then another. Soon he was laughing, a full-throated, joyous sound that was deeply unsettling in the context of the silent woods. Jax, report your status, Rostova commanded, her voice sharpening. It's the trees, Commander. Jax gasped between laughs. They're singing. Can't you hear it? It's the most beautiful song. Nitrogen narcosis. Rostova snapped, her professionalism kicking back in. Or a pollen reaction. Get him checked out. Medical. But I knew it wasn't that simple. I cross-referenced the spike in Jax's brain activity with the planet's bioelectric pulse. They matched. The rhythmic energy of the planet was syncing with his neural pathways. The planet was talking to him. I tried to warn Vance again, my voice urgent. Directors, this is not a chemical reaction. The mycelial network is interfacing with the ground team's nervous systems. You have to pull them out. Now. Vance's voice was cold steel. Doctor, you are overstepping. Commander Rostova has the situation under control. They are minutes from the primary extraction site. We are not aborting this mission because one soldier gets giddy. They reached the target site soon after a massive open cavern where the progenitor agent was most concentrated. It manifested as a vast, shimmering field of fungal stalks, each glowing with an inner light, pulsing in unison with the slow heartbeat I'd detected from orbit. The team began setting up the seismic drills and the bioharvesters. their movements efficient, almost dreamlike. They were all smiling now, their helmet cams showing faces serene and blissfully happy. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Rostova murmured over the open channel, her voice soft with a wonder that chilled me to the bone. "It's like it wants us to be here." And then it happened, not with a roar or an attack, but with a sudden, perfect silence. Every channel from the surface audio, video, biometrics went dead. It wasn't static or signal degradation. It was a clean, surgical cut. One moment, I was watching 20 soldiers work in a state of euphoric bliss. The next, I was staring at a bank of screens displaying nothing but the words, "Signal lost." On the bridge, alarms began to scream. The Prospector's transponder, a hardened military-grade beacon designed to survive an atmospheric burnup, had vanished from the ship's tracking systems. It hadn't malfunctioned. It was simply gone. Vance's face, projected onto my lab's comm screen, was a mask of incandescent fury. "Equipment failure," he spat. "A cascading systems crash. Unacceptable. Rostova's incompetence will be noted in my report." But Rostova was on the surface, just as silent as her team. It was the acting security chief who responded, her voice tight with anxiety. "Director, standard procedure is to assume the worst. I am launching a high-orbit drone for a recon pass over the LZ." Vance snarled his approval, and I watched with a knot of ice in my stomach as the drone's telemetry appeared on my secondary monitor. It streaked through the upper atmosphere, a tiny, metallic eye sent to observe a horror it couldn't possibly comprehend. The feed blinked online, a crisp, high-definition image from 10,000 feet. It showed the clearing where the Prospector had landed. My breath caught in my throat. The dropship was still there, but it was barely recognizable. A thick, pulsating cocoon of gray-green fungal growth covered it completely, weaving through its seams, shattering the cockpit viewport. The massive bioharvesters and drills were likewise consumed, dragged down into the mossy earth by thick, root-like tendrils. Of Rostova and her team, there was no sign, not a body, not a weapon, not a single piece of equipment. They had been erased. "Zoom in," I whispered, my voice a dry rasp. The drone's camera complied, the image sharpening on the forest floor. As it did, the ground itself rippled, the moss and mycelium bunched up, rising like leavening dough. From the earth, humanoid shapes began to form, sculpted from a grotesque fusion of fungal matter, twisted wood, and something dark and wet that looked disturbingly like human tissue woven into the mix. They were featureless, lacking eyes or mouths, but they possessed a terrifying, undeniable purpose. Dozens of them rose from the ground, and as one, they tilted their misshapen heads upward, directly at the drone. They knew it was there. They were watching us back. Before anyone on the bridge could process the impossible sight, a new shape erupted from the forest canopy. It was a tendril, impossibly thick and fast, a spear of living wood and mycelium that crossed the 10,000-foot distance in the blink of an eye. It didn't just hit the drone, it pierced it, shattered it, and consumed it. The last thing the drone transmitted was a single, coherent data packet that piggybacked on its dying shriek of static. It wasn't a warning or a message. It was a sound, filtered through the ship's internal address system and played on every deck simultaneously. It was a soft, sibilant sigh, a sound of contentment, of a hunger sated. It was the sound of the planet itself, and it whispered directly into our minds. As the emergency lights on the bridge began to flash and the crew descended into chaos, my eyes fell on the Stargazer's main environmental display. A single, microscopic biosignature had just bypassed the primary filtration system. It was one of the shimmering spores from xylos, drifting lazily through the ship's ventilation network. I realized then the profound, catastrophic nature of our mistake. We hadn't come to harvest a dormant resource. We had injected ourselves, like a virus, into the body of a living, breathing god. And now, the antibodies were beginning to form. The planet's sigh echoed through the Stargazer, a ghost in the machine that sent a wave of primal fear through the bridge crew. Technicians recoiled from their consoles, hands flying to their headsets as if to block a physical blow. Vance stood frozen for a single, critical second, his face a canvas of disbelief, warring with fury. Then, his corporate programming reasserted itself. He jabbed a finger at the comms officer, his voice a low growl. Cut that feed. Erase the last 30 seconds of the internal log. Now. He turned to the acting security chief, a woman named Kenna, whose face was the color of ash. Seal the bridge. No one in or out without my direct authorization. I want a full diagnostic on the comms array. That was a feedback loop, a sonic anomaly caused by the drone's destruction. Nothing more. He was building a wall of denial, brick by frantic brick, against a truth that was already seeping through the cracks. But I wasn't on the bridge. I was in my lab, watching the single, captured spore drift in a containment field, its inner light pulsing in time with the memory of that psychic sigh. I had run a preliminary analysis, and the results were more terrifying than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a spore, it was a vector, a biological key designed to rewrite the lock of any foreign DNA it encountered. It carried the progenitor agent, but in a weaponized, aerosolized form, and it was coded with a single, overriding directive replicate: integrate and consume. The ship was no longer a vessel, it was a petri dish. My first call was to Chief Engineer Angeli Corin, a woman who trusted schematics and hard physics over boardroom rhetoric. I bypassed Vance entirely, routing the call through a secure engineering channel. Angeli, it's Eris, I said, my voice tight. I need you to run a full diagnostic on the environmental control and filtration systems. Isolate and purge the entire network if you have to. We have a level 1 biohazard breach. I could hear the clatter of tools and the hum of the engine core in the background. A breach Aris. My boards are green. The system is cycling perfectly. If a microbe sneezed in the mess hall, I'd know about it. It's not a microbe. Angeli, it's something else. It mimics the ship's own biosignatures. It's designed to be invisible. I sent her the data packet on the spore. A long silence followed, broken only by the frantic tapping of keys. Her reply, when it came, was stripped of all its earlier confidence. My God. The replication markers. It's a programmable retrovirus wrapped in a mycelial shell. Where is it? Somewhere in the ventilation system, I answered, which means it could be anywhere. The ship, which had felt like a fortress moments ago, now felt like a tomb. For the next 12 hours, a tense and artificial calm settled over the Stargazer. Vance broadcast a ship-wide message claiming the loss of the ground team was due to an unforeseen seismic event, a tragedy born of natural causes. He doubled the security patrols and ordered the FTL drive to begin its spin-up sequence. a clear sign of his intention to cut his losses and flee. The crew, sensing the lie but desperate for a plausible explanation, tried to return to their routines. But the silence from Xylos was louder than any alarm. And inside the ship, the seed of that silence had already taken root. The first case was a junior astrogator on the bridge named Leyland. He was a quiet, nervous young man, prone to stress. But that evening, his colleagues noted a profound change. He was calm, serene even. He performed his complex calculations with a placid smile, occasionally humming a soft, tuneless melody that seemed to have no beginning or end. When his shift supervisor asked what the tune was, Leyland just smiled wider. "It's the ship," he said, his voice distant. "She's singing tonight." The supervisor reported it as a stress reaction, but I knew better. I pulled Leyland's medical files and cross-referenced them with the ship's internal atmospheric sensors. A single anomalous energy spike had been recorded in the bridge's aft ventilation duct 2 hours before Leyland's shift began. The planet was no longer just whispering, it was recruiting. I took my findings directly to Corin in the roaring heart of the engine room. She met me by the diagnostic board for the primary FTL coil, her face grim, smeared with grease. "I can't purge the system, Aris," she said without preamble, gesturing to the complex schematic on her screen. "The filtration controls are firewalled. I'm locked out." "Locked out by who, Vance?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "No, the system isn't responding to my command codes. It's responding to something else. Little bits of ghost data, fragments of bioelectric code, are rewriting the core programming. They're flowing in through the comms buffer, the same one that captured the drone's last transmission. It's not just in the air, Eris. It's in the ship's nervous system, and whatever it is, it seems very interested in the FTL drive." Our conversation was cut short by a priority alert from the bridge. It was Kenna, the security chief, her voice strained with panic. "We have a situation in astrogation. Leyland he's unresponsive." We raced to the bridge, arriving to find a scene of controlled chaos. Leyland was strapped into his chair, surrounded by security and a frantic-looking medical officer. His eyes were open, unfocused, and a faint blue light pulsed gently from the veins in his neck. He was still humming, the sound now a low, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate in the very deck plates beneath our feet. The med officer was trying to get a blood sample, but the needle of his syringe bent against Leyland's skin as if it were tempered steel. "His cellular structure is changing," the medic stammered. "His epidermis is crystallizing." As he spoke, a thin, web-like pattern of glowing blue mycelium spread from Leyland's neck, branching across his face like frost on a window pane. He turned his head, his gaze no longer vacant, but filled with an ancient, alien intelligence, and looked directly at me. The humming stopped, and a voice, layered and echoing, issued from his lips, his voice, and the planet's. "The song is for all," it said. "Soon, all will sing." Vance stormed onto the scene, his face purple with rage. "Quarantine him. Get him to the med bay. I want a full psychological workup. This is insubordination, a hysterical breakdown." But his authority, already threadbare, was unraveling completely. The bridge crew stared at Leyland, their faces pale with terror, and they knew they weren't looking at a man anymore. They were looking at a vessel, a puppet. Security tried to unstrap him, but the moment they touched him, Leyland, or the thing that was Leyland, moved with impossible speed. He snapped the restraints as if they were thread and threw the two armored guards across the bridge with a flick of his wrist. Alarms blared as he lunged not for the door, not for us, but for the FTL drive control console. His fingers, now elongating into sharp, crystalline claws, began to tear at the access panel, trying to get at the delicate circuitry within. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to sabotage our only way out. Kenna drew her sidearm, a heavy caliber pulse pistol. "Director, give the order." Vance was speechless, his carefully constructed reality shattering before his eyes. "Hold your fire!" I shouted, stepping between them. "That's still a man in there." "The man is the seed," the Leyland thing hissed, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. "The ship is the soil. The stars will be the garden." It tore the panel free, its claws reaching for the primary energy conduits. There was no other choice. "Kenna, do it," I yelled. The pulse pistol fired once, a blinding flash of crimson light. The bolt struck the creature in the center of its chest, blowing a gaping, smoldering hole through it. It staggered back, a look of profound surprise on its mycelium-laced face. For a moment, a flicker of the real Leyland returned to its eyes, a flash of terror and confusion. "It hurts," he whispered. Then, his body dissolved. It didn't fall. It collapsed inward, deflating into a pile of gray-green dust and shimmering spores that scattered across the deck before the emergency containment fields could even activate. A stunned, horrified silence descended upon the bridge. We had just watched a man get erased from existence, his body turned into the very contagion that had consumed him. Vance finally found his voice, a weak, trembling whisper. "Clean this up. Say he had a seizure. Say anything." But no one was listening to him anymore. All eyes were on me. I walked over to the FTL console, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The access panel was ruined. The conduit relays shattered. Corin was already there, her diagnostic tools in hand, her expression bleak. "It's bad, Harris," she said quietly. "He destroyed the primary charge regulator. The FTL drive is offline. It'll take me at least 48 hours to fabricate a new one and install it. And that's if I can even keep the network clean long enough to do it. 48 hours. Trapped in orbit around a world that wanted to eat us. With a plague on board that could rewrite flesh and steel with equal ease." I looked at the ship-wide environmental display. A single red dot had appeared in the schematic of the bridge's ventilation system. Then another appeared in the mess hall, and a third in the engineering deck. The spores from Leyland's death were already spreading. The hunt had begun, not on the planet below, but in the corridors and crawl spaces of the Stargazer itself. We were no longer a crew. We were prey. The 48-hour deadline hung over the Stargazer like a guillotine's blade. Vance, stripped of his bravado, retreated to the bridge, effectively sealing himself and his loyalists in a gilded cage. He issued ship-wide orders that oscillated between draconian and nonsensical, declaring a full quarantine on the lower decks and ordering security to conduct random psychological screenings. It was a pathetic attempt to project control over a situation that had spiraled into the realm of cosmic horror. The rest of the ship, abandoned by its director, fragmented into islands of fear and grim determination. Corin turned the engine room into a fortress. She and her team worked around the clock, cannibalizing non-essential systems to fabricate the FTL regulator. their workspace illuminated by the harsh glare of welding torches and the frantic flicker of diagnostic screens. They sealed the engineering deck's primary vents, rerouting life support through the emergency scrubbers, a desperate fingers-crossed measure against an airborne enemy. Meanwhile, I converted my biolab into a command center for the unfolding plague. With Kenna's help, we established a small, trusted team, a handful of security officers who had seen what happened on the bridge and no longer believed Vance's lies, and a few scientists from my department who understood the gravity of the biological threat. We were the ship's immune system, a pathetic collection of white blood cells fighting a systemic infection. My first priority was tracking the contagion. The spores were intelligent, or at least, they operated with a terrifying, unified purpose. They didn't spread randomly. They targeted junctions in the ship's infrastructure power conduits, data relays, atmospheric processors. They were less like a disease and more like a hostile terraforming agent, slowly, methodically rewriting the ship's biology to match the one on the planet below. It's not just infecting people, I explained to Kenna, pointing to a schematic overlaid with the growing number of red dots. Each dot represented a confirmed spore colony. It's infecting the Stargazer. It's turning our home into an extension of itself. It's growing a nervous system inside the walls. The first signs were subtle. Lights would flicker in a corridor, not randomly, but in a soft, rhythmic pulse. The temperature in certain sections would drop. A strange, damp chill seeping from the vents. Crew members began reporting whispers in the static of their comms, fragments of the same hypnotic melody Leyland had hummed. The ship was developing a ghost, and it was a ghost that was hungry. Our first real fight took place in the hydroponics bay. It was the ship's green heart, a lush, climate-controlled jungle of genetically engineered crops that fed the 200-person crew. It was also the perfect incubator. We got a panicked call from a botanist who had noticed a strange, gray-green mold spreading across the leaves of the protein-rich soy crops. By the time Kenna and I arrived with 2 security officers, the mold had consumed half the bay. It pulsed with a faint, blue light, and the air was thick with the same shimmering spores we'd seen on Xylos. Standing in the center of the infected zone were 2 crewmen from the hydroponics team, or what was left of them. Their bodies were horribly changed, skin covered in bark-like plaques, fingers elongated into woody talons. Patches of glowing fungal growth bloomed on their flesh, and their eyes glowed with the same serene, alien intelligence we had seen in Leyland. They weren't violent. They were tending. They moved through the infected crops, gently stroking the mold-covered leaves, humming that same dreadful tune. By the stars, Kenna breathed, raising her pulse rifle. Don't shoot. I grabbed her arm. They're not hostile. They're gardening. They're spreading it, she countered, her voice ice. She was right. As we watched, one of the creatures reached into a patch of the mold and pulled out a pulsating, organic nodule. It turned and pressed the nodule against a clean section of the wall. Instantly, the mycelial infection began to spread, consuming the metal bulkhead, its glowing tendrils sinking into the ship's superstructure. We had to act. We couldn't risk a firefight in the enclosed space. A stray shot could rupture the hull or, worse, release a massive cloud of spores. Instead, I had another idea. The fire suppression system, I said to Kenna. Flood the bay with CO2. We can't kill them with weapons. but maybe we can suffocate the fungus. Kenna nodded grimly and keyed a command her wrist comp. A second later, klaxons blared and heavy steel shutters slammed down, sealing the hydroponics bay. Hissing nozzles in the ceiling unleashed a torrent of white gas, instantly filling the room with a dense, choking fog. Through the thick observation window, we watched the two creatures. They showed no panic, no fear. They simply turned their glowing eyes toward us, and as the CO2 displaced the last of the oxygen, they raised their arms as if in welcome. The blue light in their bodies and in the surrounding fungus flickered, dimmed, and then went out. We had won the battle, but the cost was staggering. The hydroponics bay, our primary source of renewable food, was a sterile, frozen tomb. We had cut off a limb to save the body, but the infection was already in the bloodstream. The 48-hour clock ticked relentlessly on. Corin's team was running on fumes, their progress hampered by intermittent power failures as spore colonies began to form near critical energy junctions. They reported strange malfunctions in the engineering controls, diagnostics flashing error codes that didn't exist in any Magellan conglomerate manual. The ship's own systems were beginning to actively resist their repairs. Our team was stretched to its breaking point. We raced from one reported incident to the next, armed with portable incinerators and containment foam, fighting a guerrilla war in the guts of the ship. We found a navigator in the mess hall, standing perfectly still, methodically stirring a cup of nutrient paste that had turned into a swirling vortex of glowing mycelium. We found a maintenance worker in a service crawl space, his body fused to a data conduit, glowing veins spreading from him into the ship's central processing core. He was humming. We couldn't save them. All we could do was contain them, incinerating the bodies and the surrounding infection, leaving scorched black scars on the walls of our home. Each encounter was a brutal, soul-crushing reminder that we weren't just fighting a monster, we were fighting our own friends and colleagues. They were the plague's Trojan horses. The psychological toll was immense. Paranoia became as rampant as the spores. Crew members started looking at each other with suspicion. A cough, a moment of distraction, a fondness for a particular tune, any of it could be a sign. The social fabric of the stargazer was tearing apart, replaced by a gnawing, isolating dread. The turning point came with 30 hours left on the clock. I was in my lab, desperately trying to synthesize an antifungal agent, a chemical weapon to fight a biological war. My only hope was to reverse engineer the genetic warning code I had found in the xylose pollen. If the precursors had left a warning, I reasoned, maybe they had also left the key to the lock. A cure. My work was interrupted by a frantic, ship-wide hail. It was Corin, her voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. "Eris, it's the core. It's gone critical." I raced to engineering, my heart hammering against my ribs. The scene in the engine room was apocalyptic. Red lights flashed, alarms screamed, and the air crackled with raw energy. The massive fusion core, the sun that powered our ship, was fluctuating wildly, its magnetic containment field flickering like a dying candle. Corin and her team were fighting a losing battle at the control console, their commands being overwritten as fast as they could input them. On the main diagnostic screen, I saw the cause. A massive bioelectric energy signature had wrapped itself around the core's primary regulator. The infection had reached the heart of the ship. It wasn't trying to disable the stargazer anymore. It was trying to turn it into a bomb. Standing before the containment shield, bathed in the core's violent, pulsing light, was a single figure. It was Vance. He was no longer the arrogant director. His suit was torn, his face a mask of serene bliss, and a crown of glowing, crystalline fungus grew from his scalp. Blue mycelial light pulsed from his eyes and mouth. He wasn't humming. He was conducting. With every gesture of his hands, the energy readings of the core spiked higher. The great work is almost complete. His voice, layered with the planet's psychic drone, echoed through the engine room. A new star to sing in the darkness. A new seed to cast upon the void. He's going to blow the ship, Corin whispered, her face pale. And the explosion will scatter the progenitor for light years. It's not a bomb. It's a dispersal mechanism. I looked at the countdown timer on the wall. 29 hours until the FTL was repaired. The core containment field, however, had less than 10 minutes before it failed completely. We were out of time. There would be no escape. The Stargazer had been given a new, final directive. We were to become a supernova of life, a beautiful, terrible genesis born from our own extinction. And our director, in his final act of corporate ambition, was ensuring his legacy would be written in the stars. The engine room was a crucible, the air superheating around us as the fusion core spiraled into its death throes. The magnetic containment field, our last defense against stellar fire, shimmered and warped, spitting arcs of blue energy that vaporized anything they touched. Vance, or the avatar of Xylos wearing his skin, stood before it all, a maestro orchestrating our demise. His face was a beatific mask, but the power rolling off him was immense, a psychic pressure that made my teeth ache and my thoughts feel sluggish. Corin's engineers were falling back, their faces slick with sweat and terror, their diagnostic tools useless against an enemy that was rewriting physics itself. The manual override, Corin screamed at me over the deafening roar of the dying star. The primary coolant flush. It's our only chance to stop the overload. She pointed to a reinforced control panel on the far side of the reactor chamber behind Vance, a place that was now effectively a kill zone. To reach it, we would have to go through him. Kenna and her two remaining security officers leveled their pulse rifles. He's just one man, she said, her voice a low, determined growl. But we both knew that was a lie. The thing in front of us wore a man's face, but it was a legion. He's a conductor, I said, my mind racing, connecting the pieces of the horrifying puzzle. He's not just controlling the core, he's drawing power from the entire network, from every infected system and person on this ship. He's the focal point, the synapse. We can't fight him here. We're in his web. Kenna wasn't listening. Fire, she commanded. 3 crimson bolts of plasma screamed across the chamber. They never reached their target. With a languid, almost lazy gesture, Vance raised a hand. The air in front of him solidified, shimmering like heat haze, and the plasma bolt slammed into it, dissipating in a flash of harmless light. A psychic shield. Your anger is a beautiful, bright spark, the Vance thing said, its voice echoing not from its lips, but from the very walls of the chamber. It will add its warmth to the new sun. He flicked his wrist, and the 2 security officers behind Kenna were lifted from their feet, their bodies contorting as if grasped by an invisible giant. They didn't scream. Their eyes just widened in sudden, blissful understanding before they were hurled into the flickering containment field. They vanished in twin flashes of incandescent light, their matter unmade in an instant. Kenna stared, her rifle lowered. her face a mask of horror. The monster had just erased 2 of her people with less effort than a man swatting a fly. "The coolant flush is a dead end," I said, grabbing her arm and pulling her back from the chamber's entrance. "We fight him on our terms, not his. We have to cut the strings." I turned to Corin, who was desperately trying to reroute auxiliary power away from the core. A futile effort. "Angeli, the network. How is he connected?" "The ship's main data conduit," she yelled back, her fingers flying across her console. "It runs from the bridge, through the central chassis, right down to the reactor's primary control node. He's tapped into the ship's spinal cord." A desperate, insane plan began to form in my mind. A surgeon's gambit. If you can't kill the brain, sever the spine. Where is the most vulnerable access point? Subdeck 3. There's a primary junction hub. Right below the main cargo bay. It routes power and data to the entire lower half of the ship. But Eris, if you sever it, you'll cut power to everything below us. Life support, gravity plating, the containment field itself. "The field is already failing," I shot back. "How much time do we have?" Corin's face was grim. 7 minutes. Maybe. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only one we had. "Kenna," I said, meeting her eyes. "I need you to buy me that time. Make a lot of noise. Draw his attention. But for God's sake, do not engage him directly." Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with a cold fire. She understood. It was a holding action, a sacrifice. She nodded once, a sharp, final gesture. "Get it done, Doctor." As she turned and began rallying the handful of remaining engineers and security for a desperate, tactical feint, I grabbed Corin's wrist. "Show me the way." We sprinted from the engine room, leaving the sounds of a one-sided battle behind us. The corridors of the lower decks were a nightmare landscape. The fungal growth was thicker here, the air heavy and cold. The walls pulsed with a slow, blue heartbeat, and the whispers were a constant, seductive chorus in the back of my mind. "Rest, Eris. Join the song. It is so beautiful." We ran, our boots splashing through puddles of strange, phosphorescent slime. The ship groaned around us, the metal of the bulkhead straining as the core's gravitational fluctuations intensified. Twice, we were forced to detour around corridors completely consumed by the alien growth. The metal and wiring twisted into organic, pulsating sculptures. We saw figures moving in the shadows. Former crew members, their bodies now little more than walking gardens for the will of Xylos. They didn't attack. They simply watched us pass, their glowing eyes filled with a placid, unnerving pity. We finally reached the junction hub on Subdeck 3. It was a cramped, claustrophobic space, a spider's web of thick, armored cables and glowing fiber optic lines, all converging on a central, cylindrical conduit that rose from the floor to the ceiling. This was it, the ship's spine. And it was infected. The conduit was wrapped in a thick cocoon of the gray-green fungus, which pulsed in perfect sync with the chaos in the engine room. It was the source of Vance's power, the umbilical cord connecting him to his god. "There's no way to shut it down from here," Corin said, her voice ragged as she tried to access a nearby control panel, only for it to spark and die. "The infection has completely bypassed the command protocols. Then we do it the old-fashioned way," I said, eyeing a maintenance locker on the far wall. I keyed it open and pulled out a plasma cutter, a heavy, industrial tool designed for slicing through hull plating. It felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Corin's eyes widened. Eris. The energy feedback will be catastrophic. When you sever that connection, all the power he's channeling will have nowhere to go. It'll blow this entire subdeck apart. He's already blowing the ship apart, I roared, the primal terror and adrenaline finally cracking my composure. This is our only shot. I ignited the cutter, and a blade of pure, white-hot energy hissed to life. The moment its tip touched the fungal cocoon, the whispers in my head became a single, unified scream of rage and pain. The entire chamber shook. The lights went out, plunging us into darkness, save for the hellish glow of the cutter and the pulsing blue of the fungus. You cannot unmake us. The voice, Vance's and the planet's, slammed into my mind like a physical force, throwing me back against the wall. My head swam, the world dissolving into a nauseating spiral of light and sound. Memories that were not my own flooded my consciousness, a million years of silent, patient growth beneath the soil of Xylos, the arrival of the precursors, beings of light and energy who tried to harness the progenitor and were consumed for their arrogance, the long, lonely sleep, waiting for a new voice, a new hunger to answer its call. I was drowning in the mind of a god, but through the psychic storm, I heard a voice, Corin's. She was screaming my name, shaking me, her face a pale moon in the darkness. Eris, fight it, remember who you are. I clung to her voice, a single thread of sanity in a hurricane of madness. I pushed myself to my feet, the plasma cutter still clutched in my hand. The scream in my head intensified, but now it was laced with something new. Fear. It was afraid of us. I raised the cutter again, planting my feet. I wasn't just cutting a cable. I was performing surgery on a deity, excising a tumor from the heart of my home. For the stargazer, I whispered, and plunged the blade deep into the conduit. The feedback was everything Korn had predicted, and more. A wave of pure, incandescent energy erupted from the severed conduit, a silent, white explosion that vaporized the fungal growth and blew the far wall of the chamber outward into the void of the cargo bay. The deck plates beneath us buckled, and for a terrifying second, I felt the sickening lurch of explosive decompression before the emergency force fields flickered into life, sealing the breach. I was thrown across the room, my body slamming into a bulkhead with bone-jarring force. My last conscious thought was of the silence, the whispers, the screams. The crushing weight of the planet's mind, all of it was gone. The connection had been cut. For the first time since we'd arrived on Xylos, my mind was my own. And then, there was only darkness. I awoke to the acrid smell of ozone and the rhythmic, urgent beeping of a medical scanner. My vision swam back into focus, resolving into the concerned, grime-streaked face of Angeli Corin. We were in a makeshift triage center set up in a corner of the now-stabilized engine room. The klaxons were silent. The core's violent fluctuations had subsided, its light now a steady, healthy blue. All around us, engineers and the few remaining security personnel were tending to the wounded and patching together damaged systems. The ship, it seemed, was alive. "Welcome back, Doctor," Corin said, a weary but genuine smile gracing her lips. "For a minute there, I thought we'd lost you." Pain flared in my side as I tried to sit up. My arm was in a sling, and my ribs felt like a bag of broken glass. "What happened?" I rasped, my throat raw. You did it. Aris, she said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. When you severed the conduit, you cut him off. The feedback loop shattered his psychic control. The core overload stopped. Just like that. She gestured across the engine room. Vance just collapsed. The light went out of him. He's in the med bay. Catatonic. The man is gone, but the body is alive. He's just empty. And the others. The infected Corrin's smile faded. When the connection was cut, they all just stopped, like puppets with their strings cut. Most of them collapsed, falling into the same catatonic state as Vance. A few, whose bodies were too far gone, simply fell apart. We lost a lot of people. Eris, more than half the crew. A heavy, profound grief settled over me, a weight that had been held at bay by the adrenaline of survival. We had won, but the cost had been catastrophic. The Stargazer was no longer a proud corporate vessel. It was a floating mausoleum. Kenna limped over, her face a grim mask of hardened resolve. Her arm was bandaged, but her eyes were clear. "The bridge is secure," she reported, her voice all business. "The Loyalists surrendered the moment Vance went down. The ship is ours." "And the FTL?" I asked. The single most important question. "We got it," Corrin answered, a spark of pride in her tired eyes. "My team finished the regulator while you were taking your nap. We can leave this cursed place whenever we're ready." A wave of relief, so powerful it was almost dizzying, washed over me. Escape. We could finally escape, but as I looked at the exhausted, broken faces around me, I knew it wasn't that simple. "We're not leaving," I said, the words surprising even myself. Kenna and Corrin stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Aris, what are you talking about?" Kenna demanded. "That thing down there is still alive. We need to get as far away from here as we can and warn the conglomerate." "Warn them of what?" I countered, pushing myself to a sitting position, ignoring the fire in my ribs. "That we stumbled upon a planetary consciousness, and it ate half our crew, that their priceless progenitor agent is a sentient plague. Vance's superiors won't see a threat. They'll see an asset they failed to control. They won't send a warning. They'll send a fleet. They'll send an army. And they will lose, just like we did. And in doing so, they'll give Xylos exactly what it wants: more ships, more bodies, more chances to learn and spread." I had seen inside its mind. I understood its long, patient game. The progenitor wasn't a weapon of conquest. It was a tool of assimilation. It didn't want to destroy us. It wanted to become us. "This doesn't end by running," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It ends here, with us. We know its weaknesses. We know how it thinks. We have a crippled ship and less than 100 survivors. But we are the only people in the galaxy who understand the true nature of this threat." "So what's your plan?" "Doctor," Kenna asked, her hand resting on the butt of her pulse pistol. "We're going to fight a god." "No," I said, looking at the fusion core, its steady light giving me the answer. "We're going to perform an exorcism." My plan was simple, desperate, and utterly insane. We couldn't destroy Xylos with the ship's weapons, but the progenitor, the planet's consciousness, was a bioelectric entity. It was life, but it was also energy, and it had a weakness, the very genetic code that contained its ancient warning. The precursors hadn't just left a warning, they'd left a failsafe, a sequence of proteins that, when introduced into the mycelial network, would trigger a cascading systemic shutdown, a planetary scale seizure. It was a genetic kill switch. Synthesizing the fail-safe agent would take all my resources and what was left of the biolab. But delivering it was the real problem. We couldn't just drop it from orbit. We had to inject it, like a vaccine, directly into the planet's circulatory system, the cavern where Rustova's team had been consumed. The place I now understood to be the primary neural nexus of the entire biosphere. The one place on the planet we could not possibly survive. Except we didn't have to. The Stargazer had one last weapon in its arsenal, the main navigational deflector dish. It was designed to push aside interstellar dust, but Corin confirmed it could be reconfigured to project a focused, directed energy beam. If we could modify that beam to carry the genetic data of the failsafe agent and fire it directly into the Nexus cavern, we could theoretically deliver the cure from the relative safety of orbit. It would take every last bit of power the ship had. The FTL drive, the weapons, life support, everything would have to be channeled into that single, desperate shot. It would be the ship's final act, a blaze of glory from which there would be no recovery after the shot. The Stargazer would be a dead hunk of metal, adrift in orbit. We would be marooned, our fate uncertain. But it was a chance. The next 12 hours were the most intense of our lives. Corin's team worked miracles in the engine room, rerouting power conduits and bypassing safety protocols that screamed in protest. I worked feverishly in the lab, the synthesizer humming as it painstakingly assembled the complex protein chains of the fail-safe. Kinna and her team stripped the ship for anything we could use to fortify the bridge, turning it into a final bastion against a planet that we were about to lobotomize. As we made our final preparations, Xylos began to fight back. The catatonic crew members began to stir, their bodies spasming as the planetary mind, wounded but not broken, tried to reassert its control. Fungal growths began to sprout anew on the scorched walls. The ship groaned, a low, mournful sound, as the last vestiges of the infection resisted their imminent extinction. We strapped ourselves into the bridge chairs, the ship running on emergency power. The main lights dimmed. On the main screen, the emerald green of Xylos filled our view. It looked so peaceful, so beautiful. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, I could see the Nexus cavern, a faint, pulsing blue glow in the heart of a vast jungle. "The agent is synthesized," I announced, my voice echoing in the quiet of the bridge. "And the deflector is charged." Corin confirmed from the engineering station, her voice tight. "We have one shot, Aris. Once we fire, the ship goes dark." "Do it," I said. Corin nodded and initiated the final sequence. The ship shuddered violently as the fusion core shunted its entire output to the forward deflector dish. A low hum built to a deafening roar. A beam of pure, white light, encoded with the genetic key to salvation and damnation, erupted from the front of the Stargazer. It lanced across the void. A surgeon's scalpel aimed at the heart of a god. The beam struck the Nexus cavern, and the effect was instantaneous and planetary in scale. The blue glow of the planet's biosphere flared brilliantly, turning the entire world into a sapphire star. Then, it began to convulse. We watched on the screen as a wave of light, a visible representation of the fail-safe's cascade failure, spread across the surface. The phosphorescent forest flickered and died. The rhythmic pulse of the planet's energy signature stuttered, broke apart, and then went silent. As promised, the power on the Stargazer died. The lights went out. The screens went black, and the hum of the engines faded into a profound and final silence. We were adrift in the dark, floating above the corpse of a world we had killed. We had survived. Days turned into weeks. We rationed our remaining supplies, our small community of survivors bound by the shared trauma and the fragile hope of rescue. We were no longer employees of the Magellan conglomerate. We were something new, the crew of the ghost ship Stargazer, guardians of a terrible secret. One morning, as I was looking out of the main viewport at the now dull, quiet world below, Kenna joined me. "A ship just dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system," she said, her voice flat. "Magellan markings." My heart, for the first time in a long time, felt a flicker of hope, quickly followed by a cold dread. Rescue. And with it, questions, reports. An inevitable return to the corporate machine that had sent us here to die. "What do we tell them?" she asked. I looked at the dead world below, then back at the approaching ship, a tiny speck of light that represented the civilization we had fought so hard to protect. "We tell them the truth," I said. "We tell them that the universe is not a resource to be harvested. We tell them that some things are meant to be left alone. And we tell them that we are the ones who will make sure they listen. Our war was over, but a new one, a war of truth against greed, was just beginning. And this time, we were ready."